You're muted, Logan. All right. Welcome to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. Still working out the bugs, but we're getting there. Much better computer things. Bugs, but we're getting there. Who am I echoing on? Why don't everybody mute unless you're not talking, and that should fix it.
I had it playing on 2 streams, and I just muted one of them. I hope that'll fix it.
Oh, that's what it was then. Don't bother muting, guys, if you don't want to.
I did too, but I'm blaming Mike.
Can you just mute, Carpenter? Can you just mute the whole time?
Yeah, that'll be perfect.
Okay, good. I assume everybody can hear us, so we've gotten past that hurdle. Please comment on the side. Well, my wife is watching from school, and she just called Griffin a really handsome man. So I think she was referring to me, but I'm hopeful. So anyway, this is a tribute to Joe Pulver, who passed away a year ago yesterday on April the 24th, 2020. 2020 took a lot from us, and that was just one more thing. So we've got Pete Rollick here, Mike Griffin, the Dude, aka Matthew Carpenter, Jeff Thomas, Rick Lay, and Michael Cisco, and of course, the most important person in the room, Cat Pulver. So, hello everybody, thanks for being here. I just want to do a really brief, have you guys introduce yourself, and then we're going to start with Michael Cisco and talk about Joe and his work. And if you're watching live and you have a question, please type it in there. We will do our very best to cover it. Can't promise, but we'll do our very best. So shout out any questions or comments that you want. So Pete, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Pete Rollick. I write short stories and novels, do a little bit of literary criticism. I sell books to John Langan, and I collect a massive amount of Lovecraftian and Cthulhu Mythos material.
What the hell? John Langan's here.
Where?
Hey, John.
Hey, Mike.
Mike Griffin, introduce yourself, please, sir. You are muted. I thought you were like some computer whiz.
I am, but mute on Zoom is pretty complicated. I am Mike Griffin, also known on my book covers as Michael Griffin. I'm a writer in the Portland, Oregon area.
Thank you. Let's see. John Langan.
Well, according to Michael Cisco, I am a sketchy drifter who has just drifted into this convocation, although I prefer Redneck Santa.
I just saw that.
But yeah, hi, I'm John Langan. I write some books, and I'm very glad to be able to be here for this today. Joe was really important to all of us, and I think to the field, however we define that. And I'm glad that we're taking this time to remember him.
Well, Kat had asked me if we could do, after the guest that I had lined up, who was Bo Johnson, really nice guy, if we could spend a little bit of time on Joe. And I thought, I'm just going to ask Bo Johnson if he'll mind rescheduling. He was very nice about it. So he'll be the guest next week. And so we can devote this entire episode to Joe. And John, I'm glad you're here. I was hoping you'd make it. So
that wasn't what you wrote to me. You were like, "Stay away, Langan. I don't want you here." But okay, fine. If that's how we're going to play this, that's
it. It was reverse. It was reverse day. I was trying reverse psychology on you, and it worked.
I would have to have psychology to begin with for that to work.
The Dude. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Matt Carpenter. I run eZine Movie Night for Mike. So if you ever want to watch a horror movie, just look at the eZine Facebook page. We have a show usually every Saturday night. I'm also giving out a prize this week. It is a novel in the Arkham Horror series by Fantasy Flight Games. This one itself is called The Last Ritual. nice paperback. If you want to win it, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put ritual in the subject heading. We usually draw a winner about a month or so after the fact, so plenty of time to get an entry in.
Thank you, Matt, for that and for running eZine Movie Night. And if you forget what he just said about eZine Movie Night, all you have to do is go to lovecraftezine.com, and one of the choices at the top is exactly that, Lovecraft eZine Movie Night, and it'll point you in the right direction. So anyway, Jeff Thomas, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Jeffrey Thomas. I'm a writer and live in Massachusetts.
New England. Who we got left? Rick.
Rick Lee, writer, and I'm a collector of pulp magazines.
Cisco, I don't think I got to you yet, did I?
No, I'm
Okay,
Michael
go ahead.
Cisco.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Sorry,
And introduce yourself.
Cisco. I write and I teach. I live in New York City. I write novels and short stories, and I also write literary criticism too.
All right, and then correct me if I'm wrong, but I think who we have left is Joe's wife, Kat Pulver. Do you want to say something?
We have Rick.
Yeah, we got Rick.
Righty.
Kat, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. And
All right.
hopefully unmuted.
The floor is yours.
Oh, the luxury. Kat Pulver, wife of the late but not forgotten Joe Pulver. The pretty much only one in here who is not an artist or writer, and owner of the only true German Godzilla. So, Langen, forget it. We're done.
9.
Yeah.
9.
Godzilla is back.
Mm.
All right, so we've already had a question, and then we'll move on to Michael Cisco. One question I have for the podcast, I'm reading. Joe was very active on this podcast. Lots of programs. How did it start? You asked him to do it, and he just accepted. He really enjoyed it. Well, I guess this is more of a question for me. A long time ago, like 9 years ago, the podcast wasn't really a podcast. It was just, I thought, I get to see these guys at conventions and so forth, and it happens like once a year, or not very often at any rate. And I thought, this would be the next best thing to just chat with everybody in person and helping to build this, a small part of the weird fiction, cosmic horror community, etc. And then what happened was it kind of morphed, it evolved into a video podcast. And I wasn't asked, I was told that Joe would be a part of it, and I was just fine with that. So if there's one single word, if you only had one word to describe Joseph Pulver Sr., it would be passion, in my opinion. Just a very, very passionate guy in his work, in his friendships, in his support of other writers and editors and creators. So, all right, so I've answered that, and let's hear from Michael Cisco for a bit.
Hi, thank you. How long? I can't even remember. When did I meet Joe? It would have been.
Michael, I'm sorry. Can you speak up just a bit?
Okay, I'm sorry. How's
No,
this?
you're-
Is this okay? So I think I met Joe in the late 90s, sometime around, it would have been maybe 96 or 97. Back when Bob Price was living in Bloomfield, New Jersey, and he would have these get-togethers at his house, and it would be, Joe was invited. And I think Joe was contributing to various of Bob's many zines back when zines were zines.
Mm-hmm.
Come to think of it, when they were actually staple bound pieces of stationery that had to be mailed and eagerly awaited. And that was where, and Joe always had something interesting to read. But when I met Joe, he really thought of himself as a fan. He identified himself as a fan, as a Lovecraft fan, as just sort of an enthusiast for all kinds of things, for music, for Diamond de Gallus, to punk rock, to whatever, to this kind of writer, that kind of writer. He was like an amorphous Shoggoth-like creature, in the sense that he was constantly gobbling up culture all around him in all different forms all the time. And he loved everything that was, he loved everything good. And so he had an endless appetite for the good stuff. And he was only then just kind of tentatively putting out his feet onto the ice to try to start writing on his own. And I got to see him start reading. We would always read something we were working on out loud to each other in these little meetings, and share ideas, and feedback, and whatever. And he would you would watch him thinking, absorbing, and you could watch him grow right in front of you. You could watch him. He was always thinking. He had something in him that he wanted to say, and he was a little too shy and self-conscious at first to really. That might sound strange connected with Joe, but he was a very modest person. He never, to my knowledge, he was always, if anything, very self-effacing, and tended to I think, to underrate himself rather than overrate himself. He would look at other people and say, "Those are the real writers. I'm just kind of along for the ride." But secretly, behind the scenes, he had his own distinct voice. And all you have to do is look at a page, and that's Joe. So you flip open the book, and no one else wrote pages that looked like that, with dots and crossouts and all the rest of it. They were using that's what he was like, using every resource that he could get his hands on. So if he says, "Okay, we need fear in a bigger font, right over here, we'll do it. I'll use the spacing." If he could have gotten different colors in here, he would have done it. He would have color coded the text. He would have color coded the pages. He would have had a pop-up section that you probably wouldn't want to open in front of young people. You would have had, like a bit of like a musical stripe going down the side. There'd be a film strip. I mean, he would adapt. He had a sort of a voice that could adapt in pretty much any medium. You could really easily imagine him doing movies. You could really easily imagine him writing songs. And it all connects to what Mike was talking about, and I'm sure other people will relate to, his deep enthusiasm, as you say, that passion, that love of art and poetics, poetry in particular. He just had an innate sense of it, an innate love of it. And that was part of who he was, right down to the bone, just like smoking cigarettes, just like dressing lightly in cold weather. That was Joe. He loved poetry. He loved beauty. That's what he loved, really. He loved beauty. And like all of us, perhaps he looked around and didn't quite see enough of it in the world. And like all too few of us, he actually tried to do something about it. He actually tried to make it, create it, and he gravitated toward anybody who cared about it. And so that is what made him such a good editor. It's what made him such a good friend and a good colleague. He was, and I think we all talk about how he supported everybody, because he was cheering us all on to make beautiful work. And being around Joe, I'll close with this because I don't want to overstay my welcome. But Joe, because he sort of started out identifying himself as a fan, and because he was a reader, and because he would read you, he wouldn't just say he read you, he'd actually read you. And he'd say, "I love that part." And you'd remember, yeah, right, this is for people, right? This isn't just something I do in my room and like send off to some magazine that never talks to me. This is actually, there are people on the other end who receive this, and it actually can be very, very meaningful to them. A relationship with beauty that you share with them, not so much something you do for them. But I don't know if that makes sense. But you couldn't forget that around him. it's not that he kept you honest. Oh, he did, but he kind of brought a whole room full of people in with him whenever he came in. You were always aware of the people he was connected to. You knew that what you mentioned to him would get around, and next thing you know, like 25 other people would be in a project. So what can I say? And he had the voice, right, to brave the windmills for a mere glimpse of redemption. And she emphatically didn't want death. Not now. All one word. And then down here it says, she came here to find life, to bloom and be glad, to be in the arms of a beautiful young lover who gave his treasures as freely as his perfect kisses. Lily didn't want death, she wanted celebration. But the king, call him doom or destiny or the grim reaper or the collector of souls or cessation or simply death, wanted her for his celebration. You can open any book by Joe at random and pretty much find a passage like that. So here's to Joe. It was a privilege to be his friend.
I can tell you many times, Michael, that we must have had, I don't know, several hundred video chats over the years for absolutely no reason at all other than just to say hi. And then there were a lot of days where he'd be working in his office and I'd be working in my office, and we'd leave that video line on and not necessarily talking all the time, but just like this feel of, you know, I'm working in the same room with Joe, he's working in the same room with me. My point is that he talked about you, and when he did, maybe you know this, but he really held you. He was in awe of your writing and your voice. So if you don't know that, I would like you to know that. I mean,
thank you.
So yeah.
This is me having my hand up. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. You're the most important person in the room, Kat.
Oh, got it. I know I'm supposed to remain quiet until the end, like everyone else, unless we start.
No, you're not. It's a loose.
As we
It's a
always
loose
do.
thread. Yeah.
But on
It's
the danger of either making Mike very happy or very sad. Did he admire your writing? Yes, you know this. Here's something you don't know. You have this very specific style of setting up a manuscript. You know, the very small font and a very specific font. I found the beginnings of several novels from the late 90s, 96, 97. They are in the very same font. If there's anything else you need to know, go ahead, but I think that's one of the cutest gestures of really liking somebody's work I've seen in a long time. And it's hell on my eyes. Get a decent font, Cisco, please.
Thank you for telling me that. Yes, I know. I don't like that tiny font. Actually, I insisted on a bigger font for some of my later works per precise. I was hurting my eyes too.
Ah, there you go.
Well, you know, if you're watching this and you're not that familiar with Joe Pulver, Joseph S. Pulver Sr. is how he appears on his books. You know, please take the opportunity to read his work. I have for years had a URL, joepulver.com, which it shoots over to his Amazon page, if I remember correctly. So if all you got to do is remember joepulver.com, it's going to take you right to Amazon. Let me double check myself because I'm a double checker. And yes, joepulver.com takes you to his Amazon page. So last but not least, with Cisco, so talking about Joe's work, you have a new book that I'm very excited to read. Could you just maybe take 30 or 40 seconds and tell us what it is? Because it looks just so fascinating and so timely. Oh, he's going to go get it.
No, you made him leave. You made him leave, Mike.
Yeah,
Damn
I
it.
would say
Storming.
he's running.
I'm storming off. No, this is the this is the hard copy. I think that's the one you mean. Anti-Society.
Anti-Societies.
Right. This is a collection from Grimscribe. This is the hardcover, which unfortunately is already sold out. But there's a soft cover that just became available, and it's also available as a pay what you want ebook on the Grimscribe page. And actually, we're working on hopefully getting an audiobook version of it put together as well, which might be very well read by me if I can get it quiet.
I was about to ask, yeah.
If I can get it quiet enough around here to record. But anyway, this is a collection that I put together. And actually, Joe might have had a little bit to do with this book. Because it's just briefly, it's 10 stories. And I decided I wanted to write a book that would be like a record album, like all the tracks, every story is about the same length. And they're all more or less on the same theme of isolation and loneliness. So it's Anti-Societies. It's from Grimscribe Press. And if nothing else, it's a handsome volume. So it'll look nice on your shelf.
My 2 cents is an audiobook from Michael Sisko. I can't see anyone but Michael Sisko doing it justice. I mean, how do you read a Michael Sisko short story? You know, he should be the one reading it.
I don't know. John Paget is who runs.
That's true.
He's an outstanding.
He's phenomenal.
Yes,
he's phenomenal.
Yeah. So he suggested he might want to do some readings here, and I would not dare say no, even if he wasn't my publisher. But I love listening to him read. So if you have, and for that matter, if you haven't heard John Paget read, or in fact read his stuff, including Secrets of Ventriloquism, that book that he put out, they're really great. They're really great.
One of the creepiest books I've ever read.
Yeah, really.
Secrets of Ventriloquism. Last I'll say, Michael, is that you and I share a common bond. We both read Daniel Pinkwater. We're about the same age, and we both read Daniel Pinkwater when we were young. The Snark Out Boys and the Avocado of Death, Alan Mendelsohn, The Boy from Mars was my favorite. The one with
the worms in Africa? Which one is that? Where they go to the...
I don't remember that one.
Oh,
I must have read Alan Mendelsohn 5 times.
Yeah, lizard music over and over, but that one about the worms had one of the funniest passages I've ever read, and it was absolutely a scream. And Daniel Pinkwater's still with us. He's like post pictures on Twitter and stuff. He's still around.
Yeah, he's on Twitter. Yeah, his byline is famous author, I think. So everything's a bit of a snark with Daniel Pinkwater, I think. So anyway, who would like to talk next about? Thank you, Michael Sisko. Who would like to talk next about Joe? Jeff, you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Oh wow, it's hard to encapsulate, your relationship with somebody like that, a friend like that. Joe and I, we would have become. I was probably aware. I'm sure I was aware of him in the '90s. We became close. 2001, shortly after I read his novel Nightmare's Disciple, and I don't really remember how it started out that we became more close friends, but shortly, around that time we started having phone conversations and so forth, and a phone conversation could last 4 hours, and like Mike was saying, talking about culture and just his passion, indeed, he epitomized it about anything, any form of entertainment. But so around that time, or shortly thereafter, he was starting up his own publishing company, Hive Press, and he put out a book by Ann K. Schwader, The Worms Remember, I think is the title, and so he wanted to do a novel of mine. And so I started writing a novel for him, and then which turned out to be Monstrosity, and it was a Punktown novel in my Punktown setting, but with the Lovecraftian elements. And unfortunately, Hive Press, he wasn't able to maintain it, but he inspired me to write that novel, and I completed it and sent it elsewhere. So I credit him a lot with inspiring me to write that book, which led to really good opportunities, people who saw that book and doors open, and I thank him for that. He was very inspirational, always encouraging your work and inviting you to his projects. And he was one of the things that I think is most distinctive about him. Is as an editor, he was a superb editor. He knew just what kind of talent to bring to a certain project. He even told me one time, "I'm not bringing you into this project because I don't associate you so much with this. Bring me in on something else." But his themes were always fascinating. You know, an anthology inspired by Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. You know, an anthology tribute to Thomas Ligotti.
This book real quick. What a magnificent looking book and such great stories. The Madness of Dr. Caligari.
And who else would come up with a theme like that? And that's what I loved, his ideas like that. You know, the Grim Scribe's puppets, and so on. And he had others lined up, others planned that because of his health, he wasn't able to see to fruition, which is a shame because he had some other fascinating projects down the road, like Born Under a Bad Sign was one of the latter projects he was planning. And it was exciting. He'd always invite me, and he'd give me kind of some clue, like Leaves of a Necronomicon is another one that unfortunately didn't come out while he was alive, but it's supposed to be coming out.
Oh man, he spent so many afternoons talking to me about how excited he was for that project.
Yeah, and then there was interesting projects that didn't see fruition. Like he was going to do a tribute to the Brothers Quay, the animators, the Brothers Quay. That didn't work out because I think that he wanted to get their approval on that, and I think they felt they weren't keen on that. I think they. But anyway, he just that kind of those kind of ideas, and
his enthusiasm was always so contagious.
Yeah,
after you talked to Joe, you were always inspired to go back and whatever your creative pursuit was to double time it. You know,
absolutely. He inspired you directly and indirectly. Directly he'd say, write a story for this, anthology or whatever. But indirectly, just as you absorb his enthusiasm and you observe it, you absorb it, and that it inspires you about how to interact with the creative ether, or whatever. How to redefine yourself and observe yourself, and how. Years ago, I've been drawing and writing stories since I was a kid. But I made this friend at the first place I worked, a boot factory, and he was an artist and a poet. And one time I went over his apartment and he was showing me his paintings and everything. And he said, "This painting, drawing I did with, I call it coffee and butts. I did it with coffee grounds and cigarette ash." And it was like a kind of an epiphany for me. It was like, because I was so into my own world, I didn't know how other artists thought and interacted with their art. And that's kind of a comparison I'm making with how it was with Joe. He kind of opened my eyes to another artist's perception, another artist's creative spirit and pursuits, and inspired me much in that way that my friend did years ago, to open my eyes to a bigger, broader kind of horizons in terms of your artistic pursuits. Seeing through other artists' eyes, I think it's a valuable, indispensable kind of exercise. And I can't think of anybody who was more inspirational in that way than Joe. Like I said, not just in what he would literally show you, these creative projects that he would literally invite you to, or that you saw him producing and that you saw him writing, such as this novel, The Orphan Palace, which I think is his magnum opus, but just observing him as an artistic spirit. He was pure artistic spirit.
He really was. Carol on the live chat asked a minute ago, for those new to Joe Pulver's work, what do you recommend starting with? I'll say real quickly that Joe was a powerful editor and a powerful writer. So, you know, if you want to see the books he edited, and start with the books he edited, you know, maybe The Madness of Dr. Caligari or something. Michael Sisko said in our side chat, which the public can't see, that his recommendation was start with a collection like Blood Will Have Its Season or Sin and Ashes. Yep, there it is. So, so yeah, I remember that the first book I read of his, I think it is important to note, please guys disagree with me if you think I'm wrong, but Nightmare's Disciple, he told me at least 5 times that he started writing it because he wanted to learn to type, which he never did. He handpicked his entire career. I don't know how the hell he got so much done doing that, you know, hunting, pecking. But that's how he did. That's how he created Nightmare's Disciple. But then my point I'm trying to make is that his later work, he seemed to, Nightmare's Disciple is a nice Lovecraftian crime novel. But his work after that is, he was like, he really found his voice. So.
Could I just comment?
Yes.
He mentioned once when he was writing Nightmare's Disciple, he had never really written anything long form before like that. And he was just like putting in everything. And I think heavily encouraged by Bob Price. And I don't think that reflects, it was like a first time to put words on paper. And he kept maturing throughout his career with writing. And I think his writing is demanding. It's sort of sui generis. It's especially the later the work you get into it, it's like you're reading inside the mind of the protagonist, like it's stream of consciousness. And so it's a lot more, a bad word, conventional in his earlier collections than later. And if you start with the earlier collection, like I would agree with Michael Sisko, Blood Will Have Its Season, as you get into his writing, you mature into that style with him. I think that would be the best approach for someone new to Joel Pulver, if I might be so bold to say.
Yeah. And Jeff, what do you think?
I think I agree totally with Matt. I enjoyed Nightmare's Disciple, but the stuff that came after, I don't think I've ever seen anybody just find their voice so dramatically and quickly. You know, I don't think of Nightmare Disciples as that doesn't reflect the purity of his voice. Not to discourage anybody from reading it by any means. It's very entertaining, but it's so different from what came after. And I felt privileged to watch that progression. And once it seemed like once he found his voice, then it just kind of exploded from him, and he recognized it and really tuned into it. And but I would definitely recommend somebody would to read one of his collections. And I'm I'm partial to House of Hollow Wounds because I edited that one. You know, so I have a real relationship with that one. And it was challenging editing, Joe. I edited.
Tell me about it. Oh my God. I get calls from him like, it's not precisely spaced right here. And I'm like, oh God.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time. I was editing the House of Hollow Wounds and another one called Stained Translations. And it took me a long time. I felt guilty. Like I thought, like I'm not holding them up here, but the way I would edit something is if I see some kind of reference to a song or a book or the uses of some French word or whatever, maybe I'm OCD about this, but I got to look it up to make sure it's spelled correctly, that it's going to, you know, and he works in a lot of that stuff in his work. And so I was looking up stuff left and right and just kind of worried that when this saw its final form, that it would maintain the like Michael was saying, the formatting was so important. It was the structure of the story. When you see it, is not just the words and what the meaning they convey. So it was very challenging to
and challenging to convert to Kindle. I mean, just how do you do that?
Imagine,
You know?
imagine. But so rewarding though. So
All
rewarding.
right, so we've got a couple
Mike?
questions.
Hold on.
Yes,
'Cause
yes.
I want
please.
to comment on this because
Yes.
many years ago I found a copy of the first edition of William S. Burroughs' Wild Boys, and the blurb on the cover says "more lucid than naked lunch." This is the best blurb they could come up with. But when I see that now, I think about Joe in relationship between Nightmare's Disciple and his later work. Nightmare's Disciple is pretty much a traditional Lovecraftian novel mixed with the police procedural. What comes next in Joe's life is a complete loss of lucidity, a descent into madness, wordplay on an extreme level that is recursive and just drives you insane like it should, and makes you question what you're reading in terms of both its literary value and the effect that it's having on you.
And sometimes I think to a lot of people, it looked like stream of consciousness writing. And Joe, on more than one occasion when we were, chatting, get a little upset about that. He's like, this is not a stream of consciousness. I'm working my ass off to get it precisely this way.
Yes, he said that to me one time. I think I even used the words in my introduction to House of Hollow Winds. I think I said it's kind of like stream of consciousness. And he said to me, it's not. I pore over every word. I agonize over every word. It might look like that. And it's great that it has that feeling. But he said, no, everything is very thought out and methodical.
A couple comments and questions. First of all, Christina Mole, hope I'm saying your last name right, Christina. Mike, can you say hi to Jeffrey Thomas, please, when you can? Thank you. My favorite author. So, and Robin Chang, I'll just present this to everybody. We're all his friends, and to Kat as well, of course. What was Joe's favorite book, or did he have one, or was it, just?
Well, I typed in the chat. He told me once that Flicker by Theodore Roszak was his favorite novel, but he was such an enthusiast about things, he might have a different favorite novel all the time. But he also at a bookstore once put a copy in my hand and said, "You buy this." So
Flicker is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wanted to say something?
Flicker is one of the things he would, back when he could still read at least once a year, so that definitively qualifies for favorite. Oh God, what is it? Games of Angels, I think. I can't come up with the last name. I'm going to chime back in later and tell you who wrote this. And one of the things that were inspiring as heck was Ricci, City of Night. Just from the word play. And
good to know. So people write those down and read those too. I'm talking to the audience.
He also really loved the crime writer Ken Bruin, an Irish crime writer. And I've read those books in there. I think there's actually a lot. Joe used to complain a lot about not being better read, having more people read his work. And he'd just say, I just got to put weird stuff and weird, style in my stories, and it's fun, and that's how I do it. But no one wants to read that stuff. But I would point at Ken Bruin, who did that kind of stuff. He would make long lists of weird stuff in the middle of his stories and weird formatting. But he's kind of a bestseller. And I would say, just do more like Ken Bruin, It's possible.
I told Joe this story once, and I'll be brief because I know you guys. As most of you know, I love old time radio theater. Okay, so Mystery Theater aired mostly in the 70s, and a lot of the stories were hokey, and some of them were good. I just love listening for nostalgia. But there's this one story about a writer, as a matter of fact. He's like mid-40s, and he's feeling old. And he writes these really different kinds of novels, and he's got this cult following, meaning, which we all know what that means, a small, relatively speaking, following, but that just absolutely love what he's doing. And by the end of the episode, the writer comes to understand that it's not about the number of people that read the book, that these readers of his are getting so much out of what he's doing, and redefines his rules for success. So I don't know if that actually helped Joe or not, or, you know, he might have had me on, might have turned down the volume when I was talking to you. That's equally possible. Well, I also wanted to say, Mike Griffin, remember the time that we were staying at your house at a con, and me and Joe with you guys, and thanks again, by the way. And Joe's going on and on about Bavarian Sound House. That's the title, right? Bavarian
Sound Studio.
Sound Studio.
Oh,
yes.
it's Barbarian Sound Studio. Yeah.
Yeah, he's going on about what a fantastic, creepy movie this is. So we all start watching it. 20 minutes in, Joe's asleep.
He was asleep sitting straight up.
Welcome to my life.
Like Joe?
Forget it. It's out.
Jeff, is there anything else you want to say
No,
before we
I'm
move
good.
on,
I
buddy?
think
But before we leave, Jeff,
Yes.
two things. I don't know if you can see me laughing while you were talking. It's really cute how you say he inspired you to continue monstrosity. From what I remember, his words when he came back to this, and he often did, included something like kicking your ass to finally get it done.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's nice.
Yeah, I've had that experience with John Langan.
It's nice to know that in the memory now it's inspiring you. I like that. The other thing, yes, Nightmare's Disciple is non-typical Pulver. In its own way it is. He's got the lists, he's got the references, all the stuff, because Beast Wars lists, oh God. It already shows his humor, because somewhere in the book, what's the typical term? Everything plus the kitchen sink.
Yeah.
And he was very proud to say that Nightmare's Disciple actually had 2 kitchen sinks in it.
I read that book before I knew Joe, and I thought about this. There was a couple thoughts I had about this book. In the beginning, this lady comes home and she's feeling kind of lonely, if memory serves. It's been years since I read it, and it's winter out and everything, and she's like, I think I'll just stand and read a book. Maybe I'll read Winter Prey by John Sanford. And I thought, I love the Prey books. I don't know who this author is, but he loves books. I can just tell, you know. And then that store, I can't remember the names, that you know, that was maintained by these 2 guys. I just felt like it was so real.
The Mortal Comics fans.
Yes.
It was. It's based on a place called Fantaco, one of the first places to actually hold a fantasy and comic convention. These people existed. They were about as real as you could get them without naming names.
Yeah. Michael Sisko, yes, the answer to your question is CBS Radio Mystery Theater with E.G. Marshall. I'll try to remember the name of the particular episode, but it's just real good about defining rules for success. You know, we can't all be Stephen King, but we have people that are inspired and that are counting on what we do, right? That's a good feeling.
Well, and we shouldn't all be Stephen King. Not that there's anything wrong with him, but there's already a Stephen King.
Right. Well, I meant in terms of sales, you know.
Oh, sure. Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like not everybody's going to sell a lot, but you know.
Yeah.
I know that, but there's you don't. Are you here to make money, or are you here to make art? I mean, what really matters? I don't think
I could not agree more. Yeah. And money is nice. I'll take money, but that shouldn't be the principal reason.
No, never.
And you could eventually be recognized as an artist after your life.
Right.
This happened with Lovecraft.
All right. Before we move on, I think I'd like to go to John Langan next. But I've got a question. Huh?
I said, what?
Yeah.
That guy. No one needs to hear from him.
Well, that's what Cisco said before you got here. But anyway,
He was right. Absolutely.
Adam Taylor says, evening, folks. Hi, Kat. Can anyone talk about what started Joe's enthusiasm for the yellow sign? And of course, that was the end of his question, but of course the King in Yellow mythos and so forth. Does anybody want to tackle that? Cisco, you might be I don't know who's best.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that what my recollections here are a little vague, but I know that his interest in chambers goes pretty much all the way back. I think that, as he was getting to know more mythos writers, he went back to King in Yellow, which was not, nowadays it's not exactly a household word, but people at least know the phrase. They may not know who Chambers is or have read the stories, but at least they know the phrase. And there's a stereotypical version of the King in Yellow, of the yellow sign that you find.
Right.
I think that it might have been something that happened when we were all getting together again at Bob's. I think we might have been talking about the sort of mythos adjacent stuff, and the way that, for example, Carcosa is originally from Bierce. It's from Haita the Shepherd, I think is the name of the story by Bierce, where the city of Carcosa is first mentioned. And I think it's strongly suggested somewhere that Chambers swiped that from Bierce.
Haita Shepherd has Haster, inhabitant of Carcosa has Carcosa.
Yeah, okay. I mean, so Haster was first mentioned in Haita the Shepherd?
Yes.
I know that was Bierce for sure. I just forget there's two stories that are candidates for that. But, so it was kind of not the knock-on effect of reading Lovecraft, and then you start to read the various people Lovecraft read. And, it seems sort of like different people would develop their own particular specialized interests, whether it would be Mac and Blackwood or people like that. And we were all discovering these writers because, again, the internet was primitive. It wasn't really that readily possible to get your hands on these books all the time. Often you had to go to actual library. Remember those? And you'd have to go get one.
Yeah. It's like you start with Lovecraft, and then depending on your particular mindset, you start to branch off into different areas of weird fiction that interest you.
Right. And so if you're using supernatural horror in literature as a reading guide, I mean, the last part of it is pretty much all Mackin, Blackwood, and some others, and M.R. James, I know that I looked up, I would not have heard of Mackin if I hadn't. That's how I learned about Mackin and Blackwood, certainly. Not sure about M.R. James. I think I vaguely knew him before, but like people like M.P. Shield, I mean, forget it. There's only one reason M.P. Shield is republished now, and that's not because he's bad or anything, but because Lovecraft mentioned him. I'm sure that Mackin got a big boost that way too. But anyway, so did Chambers. I'm pretty sure Chambers, as popular as he was back, I mean, I don't know, he was prolific anyway in his own lifetime, but I think that he owes a lot of his I mean, nobody would have known the yellow sign or any of that stuff now if it wasn't for the fact that Lovecraft had mentioned him, and that, the Lovecraftian interest pulled Chambers in. And I think that I'm trying to remember if Bob had tried to put together some sort of anthology or something like that having to do with Chambers or whatever, but maybe that was sort of around the place where Chambers kind of really began to show up on Joe's radar as an increasingly important point. And it became clear over time that he really was diving really deep with Chambers, that he actually was coming to sort of identify with Chambers and become a real Chambers expert, that he was actually acquiring sort of, scholarly grade familiarity with Chambers' life and work. So it certainly was underway by the time that I got to know him. But I suspect the seeds had been planted a bit earlier.
They had been. He's always been a voracious reader, and I think it was in his late teens when he, for the first time, came across Chambers, and we've all been there. Something just hits you, and it holds on to you, and it's on your back, and it bites you in the ankles, and it will not let go. And that happened to Chambers. I have an old manuscript via Hive Press that never came to be, from the late 90s, and that already includes a lot of, it's a Lovecraft to Chambers anthology, and I have a ton of old stories from the mid 90s, and Chambers is already right there. It's not the Pulver we used to, it's the poetry that has been unpublished, that talks a lot, that just shows what he would later dare to write down. And you can see how restrained he is. But there's already a lot of Chambers in that as well. And crap, there's short stories that haven't been finished from the late 90s. So it's like, okay, I see the influence. No, Chambers has been there. Oh, God. In the back of his mind, it's always been more yellow than green. By the way, first things first, I'm sorry. Hi, Adam. How cool. Thank you for chiming in.
Forgive me, my brain's not firing on all cylinders today, but Mike Griffin, did we speak with you? I think we did.
Not really. No, I mean, I spoke up, but I didn't do my talk, Joe.
Yeah, okay. Why don't we have you go next, and then Langan.
What?
Yeah.
Mike,
Yes.
just to finish something from the previous discussion.
Yes.
Carl Edward Wagner's River of Night Streaming had a major effect on Joe, as far as how to interpret the Close Missiles.
Mike Griffin.
Yeah.
How and when did you meet Joe, and tell us about who was Joe to you? You know.
Yeah. Well, I met Joe on Facebook actually, maybe 2010 or so, 2010 or 11. And it was more of like actually, I think my wife, Lena, met Joe first. And it was something where some of the writers that I was interested in, and I was following their, I don't know, Facebook presence. People make comments on each other's stuff, and you get to know other people just by friends of friends. And that's kind of what Joe was. Seeing Joe comment on things. I remember long ago him talking about commenting on maybe, John or Laird Barron or, writers like that I was first getting into around that time. And Lena became friends with Joe, and so did I. And really, we just became, kind of pals. At that time, I wasn't really published much at all, maybe a little. But we just talked a lot about music and chatted through Facebook chat and a lot of emails. And then after a few of those, doing Joe's very favorite way of communicating, which was to have 5-hour Skype conversations. And which he would always say, it'll just be a quick one. So let's just talk by chat, on Skype chat, but then you get going. And of course, it would go and go and go. And it's fun, but you couldn't get him off. You couldn't stop, So lots of those. And you just get to, just got to know him as a friend really more than as a writer, editor, public, those kind of relationship. That started as my writing as I started getting my own writing out there. And then as Joe was doing anthology editing, sort of coincided where my writing was reaching a level and he was doing an anthology that he invited me to where, where our relationship as kind of writer and then editor protege, that kind of relationship developed where really for a long time it had just been friends talking about comic books and music and stuff. And so I got to, after a couple of years of being friends, he was doing Grimscribe's Puppets. Actually, I think he was just finishing up a season in Carcosa, but it was pretty far along and the timing wasn't right. So he said, I won't invite you to this, but maybe I'll let you send me something for Grimscribe's Puppets. And it worked out. My favorite part of telling this story is about John Langan. I had to wait until he told me I'll let you submit a story if there's room, but I'm still waiting to hear about the submission from John Langan. And as everyone knows, John Langan will often miss a deadline or be a little past the deadline, and he will often write a lengthy story. And so an editor who wants a Langan story in their book will say, I better wait and I better leave a big chunk of pages available, because you never know what kind of mega story Langan's going to submit, 3 weeks after the deadline. So I'm wanting to submit something, and I think I did submit it, but Joe just said I'm not going to be able to consider it until we figure out what the hell Langan's doing.
Langan's like, I don't have to take this abuse from you.
So at this time, I didn't know John personally. I only knew him as somebody who wrote book stories that I liked. But every day I'm just going, God damn, can Langan just send in his story? I'm just so get it going. I want to find out if my story is going to be in this book, And so I had a lot of, hostility toward John. Yeah,
of course, yeah.
Still hasn't dissipated really completely. Finally, though, John did submit his story, and it was lengthy, but not so long that it would overrun the word count limit for the book. And then Joe told me, contingent on some edits and stuff, that my story would be in the Grim Sarps Puppets too, and it worked out pretty well in the end. So that's why I'm don't have as big a problem with John as I.
Well, I like to say about Langan that he's late and it's always worth it. He did the same thing with Autumn Cthulhu. As we talk about him like he's not in the room, and I finally got it, and I'm like, John, this is a novella. He's like, well, I know, and I read it, and I really fell in love with it, and I honestly feel he thinks I'm just being snarky, but I honestly feel it is one of the best novellas I've ever read. So John Langan's story in Autumn Cthulhu. Not trying to get you to pick up Autumn Cthulhu, although it is cheap on Kindle at the moment. So,
and Joe has a story in it.
Joe has a story in it. Laird has a story in it. Griffin, Jeff Thomas, Pete Relic, some newer writers that I wanted to make room for, and a lot of more well-known writers in the community. So yeah. Anything else, Mike Griffin?
Yeah, so I was just gonna say that there was that stage of the relationship, and then getting to meet Joe in person was a big thing, and happened as Joe was a guest at the Lovecraft Film Festival in Portland, and he stayed with us. Mike, you stayed with us around the same time, and getting to know a person in the flesh, and taking them around to grocery stores, and he stuck around for a while, and after the festival was over, we took him to the beach and showed him around, and took him to some restaurants, got him to try some oysters, which was something he thought he'd be afraid to do. So you built a lot of good memories, taking somebody on adventures, and doing stuff that even years later you're still talking about. Lena and I still go to Lincoln City and go certain places, and it makes us think of Joe and talk about Joe, because it was such a big thing to him. For some reason, I guess, to see the Pacific Ocean for the first time, and to wade into the water, and eat an oyster and have a seafood feast, and just a lot of stuff. And where we would still share these pictures even years later, after that trip was over, we'd still talk about that trip and share those pictures and all that stuff. So yeah, so that was to me, the thing about Joe that I remember is just the fun and the enthusiasm as a friend and as a guy to hang around with. There really was I don't know another friend or another person that is more fun and more engaging to be around and just hanging around with and chat about things than Joe. He's just endlessly, full of energy about things and enthusiasm, and everything that you can come up with to talk about, he's got an opinion about it, and has other ideas of other things that you might be interested in too.
But at the same time, with all of that passion, underneath it is a kind person that really wants to help other writers, editors, and artists and so forth, and encourage them. There's a quote that I quoted this last year when I wrote about Joe, but I just want to, based on what you just said, Mike, and here it is. Sometimes in this life, you meet people who you might call large-souled, who are a privilege to know. And, first time Joe fits that so well,
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, wanting to help other people. He was such an enthusiast for just good writing and good people. And so many of the writers now that I have read and that I've become friends with, work I enjoy, are people that I got to know because he'd be talking at length about planning this anthology and telling me about all the people he'd gotten for it. And he would tell me about those writers and why I should read this or that story or this or that book of that person. And I feel like he really helped me and a lot of the other people that I know widen our awareness of who was doing interesting work. And not only just with this person to person talking about other writers, but also just reading the people he chose for his books was a great way of finding out who's doing interesting stuff in the community and whose work is worth searching out and reading more of, because he was publishing so many of the great, most interesting writers that are around at the time in the, say, the 20 teens. You could read a Pulver anthology and see not only the more established names that are out there that appear in a lot of anthologies, but also newer people that would be up and coming. Would be a good way of discovering them.
What you said about meeting them, quote unquote, in person in 2013, I believe you said, and that I had been friends, and not just friends, but good friends with Joe for several years at that point, and never, we did, like I said before, we did this, half the day thing of, working and sometimes 15 minutes, nobody'd say anything, and then we'd be off on a tangent and everything. And we'd been doing that for quite a while. And then I thought, when I arrived at your house and he was there, and I thought, is it going to feel the same? And Joe saw me, ran up and hugged me, and I thought, there's no difference except, the physical contact. It was a great feeling. I felt like I did not just meet one of my best friends just now,
Yeah,
so.
I remember Lena and I were on our way to the airport to pick Joe up, and we were saying, isn't it going to be weird to see in person for the first time, not just somebody that we've met online and talked to a couple times, but somebody that we feel we know very well online, and finally see them in person. And we went up and like you said, met him in the airport, went up, kind of hugged him and started walking with him. And it was just like we had,
Exactly the same, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, like comfortable, like we'd been together for a long time.
Mike, if you're done, Kat's got something, and then we'll move over to John Langan.
Sure.
Comment and a correction. Yes, Joe had actually met or come across Lena on YouTube, on MySpace first. And for the longest
MySpace.
Yes, kids, MySpace. And for the longest time, Mike was actually referred to as Lena's husband before he actually started writing. The other musician. And
That's how everyone refers to Mike. He just doesn't know it.
Well, once you've met Lena, you know why. She's
that is true. Very nice lady and very talented lady that you got there, Mr. Griffin.
Heck yeah. And the other thing is, let's put things straight here. Joe was not looking forward to eating oysters. You made him do it so he would, later on, be allowed to gorge on seafood. Remember the picture?
Yeah, I think that was the deal. If you wanted the key lime pie and the other stuff, you have to have an oyster.
It's beautiful. It's like every Lovecraftian ever looking at a piece of moving tentacle. What the hell? Do I have to? All right, you can see he's being bribed into something.
All right, let's give Langan a taste of his own medicine and delay him some more. I kid because I love John. Robin Chang says, can panelists say more, if possible, about Joe's relationship, direct and indirect, to Carl Edward Wagner and his writing and editing? Does anyone want to tackle that? Or does anyone feel qualified to tackle that? Because I'm certainly not.
I'm just waiting to see if anyone else has something to say before I throw my 1.5 cents in.
I don't know. Did he ever meet?
No,
I don't think so.
No.
He loved his writing. He loved his taste in horror. He loved that he put so much passion into his work. I think in some ways he saw that in himself. And I can say, I think, although Kat will correct me, but you could tell he loved his writing when for A River of Night Streaming, it's like one of the few stories where he would say, that belongs in the King in Yellow canon. And that would tell you how highly he thought about it. But it was also just that Wagner was so widely read, so widely respected, had strong opinions, and loved new authors also. I think that's one of the things he liked about him.
You remember how pissed off he'd get when people would act like the King in Yellow mythos was part of the Cthulhu.
Ooh, don't say it. Don't
mythos?
say it. Don't say it.
God, I've listened to many a lecture on that. I'm like, Joe, I've heard this before.
Don't give him the soapbox. You knew how he was
Yeah.
gonna get.
Yeah, speaking of the soapbox, I want to get this out, and then we really are going to talk to John Langan. If you go to the Lovecraft eZine YouTube page, go to YouTube, type in Lovecraft eZine. All right, so there's playlists, and I've got them in certain orders. The first one is the podcast that you're hearing us on right now, and obviously you can watch past podcasts too if you can't watch live. Quiet horror and etc. Things that Scott Thomas and I are doing occasionally. And then I have a playlist, and this was put together by Pulver, but the playlist is on the Lovecraft eZine page. Now, people have said, I wish I knew Joe. I wish I could have met him in person. And I feel privileged that I did. And I can see where you're coming from, the more we talk about him. But you have two ways to know Joe. First of all, through his work. And then secondly, there's got to be hundreds of hours in that playlist where Joe where Joe is alive, so to speak, and you can see us chatting with him about this and that, and with various guests and everything. And so that's there. You can watch those, and there are quite a lot of them. Thank you, Kat, for putting that in order. And I wanted to put it on the main page so it would get as much exposure as possible. So anyway, with that said,
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Let's move on to John Langan.
Oh God.
Oh, is it
my
time
God,
for me?
really?
Is it time for me now?
Wait
Maybe
a
you'd like to
second.
hear
Wait a
from.
second. We haven't talked to you, but never mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. We're gonna have our phone in people.
Oh,
now.
wait, Mike. Before that, if I could just read into the record, there's a story in here
Please.
that I think encapsulates. I'm
Your words are hurtful, Michael Sisko. Your words are hurtful.
I missed the joke, whatever it was.
There was no joke. There was no joke at all. There was just cruelty.
Cruelty. I missed the cruelty then.
Don't worry. You can.
Although it was
watch
probably justified.
Yeah, watch the recording. Yeah, this will all be part of my lawsuit.
Okay, I'll be sure to cut this part out.
Excellent.
All right, John. How did you meet Joe?
The funny thing is
you, etc.
I am sure, like I was at the previous run of Necronomicons, but before they became Necronomicon Providence, when they were just Necronomicon, I was at the very last of them in 2001. And I know that Joe was there. I know that Michael Sisko was there, and like I think to myself, I don't remember us meeting, but maybe we did. It's entirely possible that we were. I'm trying
to imagine a 30-year-old Michael Sisko, and I'm coming up empty.
He was pretty much the same as he is now. Actually, maybe even a little older. Actually.
Okay.
And
that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a picture of all of us together. You can find it online, actually. From
Sisko's like, "You're done, Mike. I'm never coming on this show again.
And
I'll never work in this town again, Davis."
You'll never. Which town is that? The internet. So yeah, they were. I know they were both there, and I've seen the picture of Joe and Michael there, and Michael is dressing in color, which is weird.
Harry.
Joe
And
doesn't
yeah,
have gray.
yeah,
Much gray anyway.
yeah, Joe doesn't have my, it's true. And so there they are hanging out. So I think to myself, like we were probably at some of the same panels together, and I don't think we were on any panels together, but I'm sure we went to the Blasphemous Prayer Breakfast together, and you know, it's so it's weird to think that like I was there with Joe, but I hadn't really gotten to know him, and I think it probably was in person, probably the first Necronomicon Providence would have been our first physical encounter, you know, meet space encounter, but before that,
Yes.
of course, I had been invited to be part of these anthologies, the Chambers Anthology and the Legati Anthology, and then subsequently the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari one, and he did a Ramsey Campbell one as well, and I could not get it together in time for that, and that's one of my great regrets, is that I didn't get a story into that one. But I guess the way that I feel like Joe had. When we look at him now, like this almost outsized influence on what was going on. Like it didn't seem like it as much because he was a fan, right? He was always a fan. He was an enthusiast. He was always pushing someone else's work. You know, he was never like me, 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 me. I mean, he might be pushing an anthology he edited, but it was because of the people who were in the anthology. He wasn't like, look at what a
Right.
genius editor I am. And instead it would be, have you read this story or this story or this story? And the same thing, the panels that I was on with him in the more recent Necronomicons, he was always going on about other people's work, and you have to read this person and you have to read that person. So I, on the one hand, I see him as this great enthusiast and promoter for other people's work, and at the same time, he was bringing that work together in these anthologies that he was editing. And beyond that, he sort of sat, he's like one of these, like sort of a contemporary equivalent of someone like Gertrude Stein or Sherwood Anderson or someone, one of these figures who he had like a sort of, if you will, like a kind of cyber salon, like all these different people were connected, all these different talented people who were all working in the same weird end of the pool, but doing their own weird little, I don't know, styles within it, and so I think that that's to say nothing of his own work, but just to say that, first off, I think the anthologies that he edited, um, they hold up. They hold up in this really, really substantial kind of way. And I think to a large degree, yeah, the Chambers anthology probably benefited from True Detective. There was some sort of bleed over from the King in Yellow thing, but I also think that Joe in a lot of ways is really a major, maybe if not the major, a major figure in the kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, Chambers revival or whatever it is we're going through. I think that Joe really had a lot to do with that. And I think I think that you look at what he did with Casilda's song, with trying, like he was always trying to get better in all sorts of different ways as a writer, but also as an editor, and say, well, you know what, we're going to have this, this is going to be all the best women I can encourage to submit to my anthology. And as I recall, one of those stories won a World Fantasy Award. I think it was Selena Chambers, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But of course, Grimscribe's Puppets, the Legati anthology, which is also full of insane and wonderful stuff, won a Shirley Jackson Award, as I recall. So he did. I'm gratified to say that he received some acknowledgement for his editing work. I wish he'd received more for his fiction, but I also think that, as Michael said, I mean, he took fiction writing with I mean, and look, we never really talked about this. This was just the impression I got, that he took it with just, high seriousness, which is not to say that he couldn't have fun doing it, but that he loved it enough to try to give it his all. And for some reason, I always think of him and Willem Pugmire together.
Yeah.
And I think of them as working within, in some ways sort of central weird traditions, whether, sort of the Lovecraft circle in Willem's case or in Joe's case. I mean, some Lovecraft stuff, I suppose, but more Chambers, and then also all these other different interests that he had, and they just their kind of fidelity to their own visions really strikes me after all this time. The way that they just, in a just world, they both would have been rich, and or at least able to support themselves, like comfortably with their writing, but more and more the accomplishment of each of them seems to me just so substantial. They seem, I think sometimes horror maybe suffers the same problem that someone told me science fiction did. It was probably Ellen Datlow, that, although maybe not. Anyway, the point is that, like, in science fiction, more is more is better, and I think it was Gardner Dozois said, I'll never get the Grandmaster Award because I just haven't written enough, and people were like, but Gardner, what you've written is really good. And he was like, yeah, but we prize like the guy who writes a lot. And I think sometimes that horror can be like that too, because, King in particular has been so prolific, and even Ramsey Campbell, right, has been incredibly prolific, that we, and both Joe and Willem were prolific, but not to Stephen King levels, right? And so I think sometimes we forget that people can achieve a great amount without writing 60 books, and I think that what Joe accomplished as this kind of Renaissance man in some ways, right, between the editing and the writing and the overall boosting. I mean, did you ever know a man who used more exclamation points? I mean, he was, of course, responsible for the great exclamation point deficit of, I think it was
Yes, he was.
2014. And
there were days when none of us could use
yeah,
exclamation
you couldn't
points.
find an exclamation point. You were like, I need oh, no, it's not going to happen. All right, it's going to have to be another period. I'm going to have to,
There's only so many allotted in any one day.
No, I know. And I was, king of the exclamation points, man. But that's not,
exclamation points one year.
Huh?
I had to float him alone for exclamation points one year.
I remember you had some kind of crazy interest rate on that too, as I recall. Yeah.
I got 18 question marks out of that.
Yeah. But he, like, that's not bad though. King of the exclamation points. In some ways, I think like that's not a bad title. He's the king in yellow, the mayor of Carcosa, but also a great lover. A great. But all right, well, but a great.
No. I'm looking at the moment you said that. I was looking at Cisco moving around with great love, and it's like, did he mean to? No, okay, never mind. All right. By the way, I've got to chime out for a minute. It's not about you, John. I promise. I'm going to be right back. Don't take it personal.
No problem.
That's what they always say, and then So anyway, yeah, that's someone else should talk now.
I was just going to one of your points was I've always gravitated towards building communities, I guess, and at some point about 20 years ago, this simulated reality Second Life was really taken off. What I did was I had an island, what they referred to them, and it was all pure Bradbury, Autumn, some Lovecraft thrown in somewhere, you name it. And I had like horror old time radio shows playing on the radio. I remember, 90% of the people loved it, and I had a bad day and I got a couple bad comments from someone, and I told a friend about it, and he said, it's nice when people enjoy it, and it's nice when you get paid. Money is great, but it should exist because it's beautiful. And I often think about that in terms of writing or editing or art or doing anything else. What Cisco was saying a while ago about creating the art because you need to create the art, because it is in some sense beautiful to you and hopefully to others. So yeah. Who we got left? Rick Lay, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, I met Joe on the eZine podcast. And this was about, I think, 2010, Mike. That sound right?
I'd say 2011, maybe 12.
What was the first Necronomicon Providence?
2013.
2013, and it was 2012. And we had a little problem. We were using Google Chat back then. I had not been set up for it. I thought you still used something else.
The buggy Google Chat.
Well, I didn't get. I missed the test. I ended up talking to somebody else from the UK, and then and the bottom line is I got into the podcast about 10 minutes late, and we didn't go. I didn't have everybody introduced to me like we normally do to a guest. So Joe was talking, and I had no idea who he was. And he mentioned that he had two literary gods, Robert Bloch and Robert W. Chambers. And it then dawned on me that I'm talking to Joe Pulver, who I had read Nightmare's Disciples and at least his first collection by then. Probably read his second. Blood Will Have Its Seasons and the Sins book. And then I was just shocked because I had loved his Nightmare's Disciples. Even though that's atypical of his work. He, I think, outgrew Lovecraft, but found that he was not outgrowing Chambers, even though his approach to writing was very different from Chambers. I think he took the concept of Chambers of writing a coherent nightmare, or a semi-coherent nightmare, and just adopted it to modern times. What I enjoyed talking to about Joe was that we were both the same age, both born in 1955. And we had both grown up reading Marvel Comics, which may have affected why we both liked Lovecraft. I think the concept of a shared universe kind of influences your love of Lovecraft, since he was tying in Robert E. Howard and Robert W. Chambers and everybody else.
I always forget that term. What's that term again?
Shared universe.
No, the other one. The reason why I invited you on the show.
Oh, well, that was for the Wad Newton universe.
Why? Yeah.
And I got interested in shared universe series mainly because of Marvel Comics. Because that had geared my mind to major characters interfacing with one another. But get back, we both love more, and we both loved the recent MCU movies. And I loved discussing with Joe whether he thought they had done this character right or wrong. And his favorite Marvel superhero was Captain America. And we would get into very detailed discussions on Captain America. And I regret that he's not here today, because I would love to discuss Falcon and the Winter Soldier with him.
Yeah.
But that's what I miss, besides his humanity and his encouragement.
Yeah.
say anything trite because I feel his loss so deeply, but at the same time, I'm grateful for the time that we did have with him. You know, and I don't mean that to sound trite, but that's how I feel about it. So, Rick, do you want to say anything else before we move on?
I'll just say one more thing, just to get back into the Carl Edward Wagner.
Sure.
I think Rivers of Night Streaming pointed Joe in the right direction of how to approach Chambers. And I don't think Wagner influenced him that much, other than The Long Dark Rim Road, which he recently put out.
Yeah.
That reminds me, it's about a group of monster hunters in, I think they're in Russia at some point in history. And they turn out being as bad as the monsters they're pursuing. And I think he got that idea from Wagner's Kane story, Cold Light. But that's all I have.
That was the last book published in his lifetime, right, Kat? And
Yeah.
And I'm happy that I was the one to do it. He sent it to me just say, hey, Mike, what do you think of this? And I'm like, oh, what do I think? We need to publish this novella, you know? So yeah.
Rick, was that the one that was like, starts off, they're riding into Dead Demornt?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, okay.
It's called A Long Dark Grim Road, for those
It's
who
a group of monster hunters who are sort of acting like the Ku Klux Klan.
And it's got a great cover by Dave Felton. So, and it's also available on Kindle, so for anyone interested. So, Robin Chang, Rick, says that was beautiful and substantial. Thanks, Rick.
Mm.
So, last but not least, and until we get to, yes, I'm sorry.
Since Robert Chang sent me a message on Facebook, but Facebook lost it. If you're listening, could you just resend me that message? We wanted some King in Yellow work I did or something.
Before we get to Kat, Pete, what would you like to talk about in regards to Joe?
So, my first introduction to Joe was, of course, pre meeting him, was reading A Nightmare's Disciple, which just simply blew me away. And to me, it's a toss up between that book and Cody Goodfellow's Radiant Dawn series, of the best modern mythos novels that really set off what could come next and really make me think that there's a place for new mythos novels. There hadn't been one for a long time up until then. They were few and far between. But Joe really just knocked it out of the park with Nightmare's Disciple. That said, Joe and I were really great friends, and we would talk about lots of things. And we would sit around the table, whether it be in Providence or in the Columbia River Brewing Company in Portland. And I would drink and he would smoke and we would talk. And we would talk about projects, and we would talk about projects that were never going to happen. Like we had this dream project of a Dr. Phibes anthology that we knew wasn't never going to happen.
The literary rights.
Yeah. And
Right.
the guy who wrote still alive, and he wrote another book. So he's not giving it up anytime soon.
He wrote Dr. Phibes books that almost read like they're written by Joel Pulver.
Yeah. And I'm gonna say this, it's gonna come out wrong, but Joe and I did not get along literally. When it comes to our styles, they are horribly and incompatibly different. And I knew it and he knew it, and we would butt heads over it. And Joe at times was very, very upset with me because he would see something I wrote, he would read it and say, "You wrote this over a weekend." And I'm like, "Yeah, they came to me on Friday. They said they needed something Monday. I wrote it 3 days. Come on, what do you want?" And he's like, "Yeah, you don't do that." And I'm like, "It still pays the same. It's still getting 5 cents a word." But he's like, he would point to other things that I'd done, and like for the very long and what I think of as my incoherent piece that I wrote for Unlanguage, Joe absolutely loved. And nobody else who ever read it could understand it. But Joe got it. And eventually, it did eventually get published. And but I had to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. And Joe would have said, "That's okay. That's the process." And that's not, something we always agreed on. And Joe and I had a long conversation about this. I think that the word processor and word software has probably been the worst thing that could happen to writers ever, because it gave editors the opportunity to force writers to write and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite ad infinitum. Back in the day, you got one set of comments, you addressed them, and you sent them in. Now, there's no reason why you can't, edit for 1 or 2 years. I can see Cisco nodding there.
You Luddite.
And it's not that I'm a Luddite. It's just that I get it. It's the ability to rewrite and make things perfect. But it shouldn't take 5 or 6 iterations and comments from an editor on the same thing. And I've actually called editors out on, this edit that we're going through the 5th time, that's an edit of what you told me to write. That's an edit of your edit. So but my point is that Joe saw rewriting as part of the process. I see it as a partial part of the process that has to come to an end sometime. And there are other writers. Willem was one of them. Harlan Ellison was one of them, who would take stories and publish them and then come back to them and rewrite them decades later.
And not just style, whole plots.
Whole plots, yes. It's like, oh my God. And this is for collectors, this just creates nightmare stuff. But Joe and I had very different styles. We had different goals in our writing, and we talked about it. And it's, we talked about Lees in the Necronomicon and what he was trying to do with that. And it's just like, I just couldn't see how I wrote 2 or 3 stories for that book, and I just could not capture the drift of what he wanted. He wanted more mood than story, in my opinion, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But as he would constantly berate me with, it's like, "Pete, you want to tell a story all the time. You want to tell a story, and you're a natural born storyteller, and that's not always what I want." And we just could not get along that way. That said, I got 2 stories out of him. I got to publish when I did Legacy of the Reanimator. I got the reprint, Herbert West Reanimated, which included great work from not only Joe, but a bunch of other people. And then I got him to write a story for the Chromatic Court, which I had to pull him along kicking and screaming because it's exactly what he didn't want to do. I wanted a Lovecrafting King in Yellow story from Joe Pulver, and I got one. And, but he didn't like it. But ultimately, Joe and I had this sort of frustrating relationship. We were really great friends, and we agreed on a whole slew of things. But when it came to writing, we were just at cross paths with each other.
But that's okay.
And we were perfectly okay with that.
Yeah, because it's not being cross paths, it's mutual respect. He loved your work. There were times where I don't remember, there's a writer that used to do night shifts in a hotel and would actually make additional
Brian McNaughton.
Right, thank you. By writing not exactly horror stories. And
it was porn.
And part of him when
porn paid the bills for him for a while.
And that was the thing. A small part of that was jealousy, the kindness when the month comes to an end and we're discussing what are we going to buy. Are we buying food? Are we buying toilet paper or cigarettes? Because sometimes it was just like that. And he would say, I'd be one of these people that could bang out things like Rawlik over the weekend and just fucking sell it to get money. Which he couldn't. He couldn't help himself. He would literally, and I'm not overdoing this, he would spend weeks arranging 3 words in a sentence.
Right.
He was like that. He couldn't help himself. I have some things that are labeled drafts that are perfectly done. They need housekeeping. That's all they need. And he was jealous, absolutely, about people that could just do that because he couldn't. And he loved you to pieces.
And I loved him to pieces. And, it's just, it was, we talked about this a lot, that we just could not come up with projects that we both thought we could work on together.
That's not true.
Well,
it's called the Lovecraft eZine. Look at one of the first. No. Look at the first one of the first few issues.
Yeah.
Doesn't that one of them have a big fishy menu, which is a revenge story on you? How much closer do you want to work with?
Oh yeah, guys, folks listening, go to lovecraftezine.com and there's a search bar somewhere around the top right, and type in a big fishy menu, and it's basically, if I remember, Pulver getting some sort of revenge on Rawlik, and it features also a really, really great illustration by Nick Gucker, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, and it's free to read. So
it's sort of like as God and Satan decided to screw Job, the King in Yellow and Nyloth attempt decided to screw Pete Rawlik.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to tell you this, Pete, but I do have a big fishy menu in transcript with notes from Joe. So, I have the so I did I miss anyone? I don't think I did, except for Kat, of course. I want to say just a couple things quickly, and then
Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry, Matt Carpenter wanted to say something too. And what, Pete?
You forgot Matt.
Yes, thank you.
It's easy to do, no worries.
Matt Carpenter.
Okay, I just have a few very brief things I wanted to share. It's like I never worked professionally with Joe like the writers here, but if you say when you first met Joe, it was this chapbook, this Rainfall Books chapbook, for which I will be grateful for Steve Lines, who recently died also.
Can you read the title and describe it for those who are listening later?
The Night Music of Oak Dean. It's Rainfall Publication 011. They got up to about 350 before Steve died, something like that. I think this came out before 2009 or about then. I don't remember exactly.
That story was your introduction to Joe?
Yeah, it was like, because there are 3 of his stories in it, and this one was dedicated to Brian Lumley, The Night Music of Oak Dean. And the first paragraph, well, I just want to read the first sentence. They say day and his penetrating herald dawn have restorative powers, but night, mute, unknowable night, has her chanson. And the paragraph goes on, and at that point, it's like, okay, I am so in.
Yeah.
What else have you written?
Yeah.
And it was a while before he got his first collection published, which may have been a few years later. I don't remember the timing exactly, but this is when I read that story, I knew this guy's brilliant, and I really want to read more of what he writes. So for this, I am grateful to not only Joe, but Rainfall Books. There's one thing that happened once also. I ended up editing 2 books for Sam Gafford that I put out for submissions, like it was all competitive submissions. And because I thought this was going to be a Lovecraft pastiche kind of book, I was afraid to approach people that I vaguely knew. This was by 2015.
You talking about A Lonely and Curious Country?
Yeah, and so, but afterwards, Joe told me he was, in the nicest way, the nicest way, he was a little bit affronted, disappointed, I don't know the word, that I hadn't asked him to submit a story. And I thought, I'm a fucking idiot, because I thought this was too small a book for someone with a massive reputation like Joe Pulver. I was too diffident to approach him. I mean, I got some, like, Pete's in the book, but he submitted a story. I didn't request it of him. And I just felt I could have had a Joe Pulver story if I had
Matt,
smart enough to ask.
You just brought back a memory for me. My very first contact with Joe, besides reading Nightmare's Disciple, before I ever made his acquaintance. I started being more aware of him as the magazine started in 2011. And I've always been the kind of person that I'm not pushy in the slightest, but I always think that if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So I sent Joe an email and I said, I realized that, I think I said something along the lines of, this is probably beneath you. You got bigger projects to worry about, but if you ever wanted to send me something, I would sure love to publish it. I don't know. I think 30 minutes went by and there were a lot of exclamation points in the email, and he was very happy to send me something. And I just thought, it was so great. And from there on, we became friends, which I've talked about. When I think of Joe, I think about, of course, all the Lovecraft eZine video podcasts and podcasts. I think about being at conventions and seeing him outside the Biltmore or another building that convention goers were going in and out of, and it was his favorite place to be. His favorite part of conventions was standing outside of a place like the Biltmore, smoking a cigarette and talking to everybody that went by. You're smiling really big, Jeff.
Yeah, it was his office. His office was the sidewalk.
That's right. And he always had a crowd because his passion and his excitement was so contagious, and I would never join the crowd. I would always kind of watch from a distance and feel so happy for him, that he was there. another couple of things that I want to say is that there's this series I really like that I've mentioned on the show before, Angel. And in the first season, Angel loses a friend. So he goes to these godlike beings called the oracles, and he asks them, Angel loses his friend because his friend saves a bunch of people and sacrifices his life. So Angel goes to the oracles and asks them, he said, "You bent back time before, bring Doyle back, I need him." And the oracles are like, don't talk to us about, such trifling matters. And Angel says, "He's my friend." And they said something that's always stuck with me. If that is so, then it will always be, and that, the meaning was that his death does not change the fact that you're his friend. I also thought about, for you Star Trek nerds out there who've read a lot of the novels, one of the best ones is called Time for Yesterday. Very long story short, Spock has a son, and his son lives 5,000 years in the past on another planet, not Earth. And he felt he needed to go there to preserve the timeline, to stay there, I mean. And Spock is kind of, does he think of, because he can go to the Guardian of Forever and probably go see him, maybe. And the Guardian's acting up. So Spock can't decide whether to think of his son as being dead for 5,000 years or alive somewhere on the other side of time. And he's talking to this alien about this. And she says to him, "In the immensity of the all, you are forever his father." And I feel that way about Joe, that in the immensity of all in time, and space, Carl Sagan said something similar. He's my friend. He's our friend. And he always will be our friend. Mike Griffin did a really, really great thing several years ago in 2016. Is that right, Griffin?
Yeah.
I mean, you do
Sounds
great
right.
things every day. Don't get me wrong. The Pulver Day.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of great entries. There were some funny entries. There was a lot of entries. And my entry, and thanks for inviting me, the first few paragraphs were tongue in cheek. I didn't know I didn't know Joe was going to be dead in 4 years. It just never crossed my mind. And I think that more of us need to eulogize writers and creative people that we really appreciate before they die, and not just after. We're utilizing Joe now, but we did this for him before he died too, and that's because of Mike Griffin. Here's what I wrote. He's gone now, and I got a couple emails. "Oh my God, is Joe dead?" And I'm like, no, I'm writing this as if he's gone. So I wrote, "He's gone now, but we still have his work. He lives on through his books, and he continues to inspire." That's what we've been talking about. He continues to inspire this new generation of weird fiction writers. I know because I've heard them talk about him. And lately I've heard something else. One last tale, you might say. They say that sometimes, long after midnight, when the writing block sets in and everything feels hopeless, when they feel that perhaps they aren't cut out to be writers or creators, when a gibbous moon hangs in the sky and the stars almost look black, something strange happens. Their computer monitor flickers, and then a window opens on the corner of the screen. At first, all is dark. Then a match flares, and a man with a white beard and a drooping mustache, lights a cigarette. He's sitting at a desk. Bookshelves tower over him. He glares, and they can feel his eyes boring into them through cables and Wi-Fi and time and space from Carcosa. And then he speaks. Bleed, he says to him. Bleed on the page. So I know, Kat, you're always waiting for that window, but I hope that I just, I love Joe and I always will. I know the rest of you feel the same way. And I think that's all I have to say, except when you talk, Kat, maybe just briefly mention twin sons, So the floor is yours, Ms. Pulver.
You want me to talk now?
I know. I made you cry. I'm sorry. Can I read one more thing from that page? I'm so sorry. My brain is.
Sure, go on. You've already wasted me. Go ahead. Oh, you're gonna pay for this.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then I continue. If you've read this far, by the way, you can read this whole thing on the Lovecraft eZine website. Again, in the search bar, just type in Pulver and goodbye, maybe, and you'll come to it. I write, if you've read this far, this was a year ago, then I'm going to leave you with a couple of quotes from one of my favorite films, Arrival. For whatever reason, I find them comforting when thinking of Joe. And the quotes are, but now I'm not so sure that I believe in beginnings and endings. There are days that define your story beyond your life. Despite knowing the journey and where it leads, I embrace it and I welcome every moment of it. So that's all I have to say.
Until you try back in again. All right. Where do I start? Where do I finish? I should probably.
Cat cry.
Huh?
You made Cat cry.
Yeah. Fucker knows exactly how much that story means to me.
Made myself grafted too.
Yes, I used the bad word. That's what you get out of me when you do this to me. For the record, that was one of the first things that actually came to mind when Joe had passed, and for some reason that had always stuck with me. I don't know why, but be that as it may. The one warning I have to give out to all the ladies: do not do online dating. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Joe and I, like Lena and Mike, crossed paths on MySpace for the first time. So that's actually how this whole crazy thing happened. And this is why I was laughing all the time when all of you talked about meeting him in the flesh for the first time. Because, yeah, it's like, welcome to the airport. By the way, this is what you imported from the States. See if you can live with it. Because we hadn't met in person before he actually moved here. It's been a fun ride. There's been hard times, there's been hellish times, and I've talked to you in private about the horrors that were the last couple of months. It's been worth it. It's looking back at things, I'm angry about the cyst having happened and all the crap that came after it. Do I regret any of these days? No. It's been fun, it's been cool, and just seeing him wake up in 2010 when he came here, through the eZine shed, through meeting all of you guys and dozens of other people, being able to, yes, talk about the work, but yes, also talk about movies. How many times, you got to remember the time difference here. So this starts at midnight, and I would usually be working Sundays, and sometimes I'd call in a couple of minutes before the chat started, saying I was leaving work or I was about to arrive and whatnot. The times I would wake up by 4 or 5 a.m. and he would still be talking to someone, just having a ball, just having fun. He hated typing. He really, really hated it, stories or not. So the invite to talk via Skype or Google Hangouts or whatever was always his go-to weapon, and you should have known what you were getting into.
I tried to talk him into learning to type, and he would always shut me down very quickly.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that was, as much as he hated technology, that was something he loved. So I can just say I'm thankful that he got introduced to technology, to the eZine, to all of these amazing people out there, to folks he agreed and disagreed with. All of you who talked to him on for more than 5 minutes, you know how much he loved discussing things, not arguing, but looking at left and right and what was bad, and no matter if it was movies or music or literature. And you filled his life to a point that most of you probably don't understand. Is he was living on an island in a different country across the ocean. You were his people to talk to. And, just living with someone doesn't make up for all the interchange with the crazy people. So, that being said, thank you for talking to him, no matter if you're someone who's listening or if you're someone who is on the chat. And before we all start pulling out tissues, announcements. Here's the fun part. I have several things in the fire right now. Tons of irons, to be exact. They still need to be approached, but yes, I'm looking at someone to put out the Orphan Palace again. I'm just waiting for the cheers to be finished out there. Okay. There will be several new publications, one of them being an unpublished King in Yellow story via
Nice.
Yeah, we are Under Twin Suns, edited by James Chambers, who will cross paths here shortly, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, August 1st, he'll be on the show to talk about this.
mhm. He and Derek Hussey more or less bullied me into finding something they could publish. No, they were amazing. I did a Langen, I overstepped the deadline, I overstepped the word count, and they were still happy to accept it. I'm putting together several collections, one of them a pure poetry collection. If I ever find someone interested in publishing something that's not going to make any money back. There'll be a lot of new Pulver. I just have to find the time and strength to finish up with this, because it's no fun between reading this and hearing his voice in my head and fighting my eyesight. So it's going to take time, but things will come. And I now give the floor back to everyone else because I have no clue what to talk about. Give me a question or leave me be.
I think we're about ready to finish up, but I will say, and anyone else, please, any last comments you have, but I will say this about you, Kat, that I told you this in private the other day, that you've been pretty hard on yourself. It is amazing how much you have accomplished in the last year since Joe passed, with his work, with everything that you're doing with his work. And to add on to that, health problems and really bad eyesight. I don't know anyone who would have done it as well. I know I wouldn't have, so you're doing Joe proud. If he's looking from Carcosa, he's got to be pretty happy with you. So Jeff, I can see you want to say something.
Me?
Yes, you.
I'm just absorbing. No, I'm just, it's too much. There's no way to express all that could be said. It's just like when you have these, when I would have these long talks with Joe, you could just go on forever. There is no end to it.
True.
There is no end to talking about it.
It's true.
I could add one thing because I knew Joe
Please.
before he met Kat, and Kat, you changed his life. I mean, you pulled him out of a place that was not very good for him, as I'm sure you knew, and there's no doubt that you made his life inestimably better. He was a different person after he got to know you, and after he moved to Germany and he was with you. There was something soul killing about his previous circumstances, something that was really grinding him down, and he liberated himself from that. But that was big. I think you were the catalyst, no pun intended, for that. You really got him out of. You really saved him in a way, or helped him save himself. We could say, being generous, and yeah, it was a good thing. It was a very good thing when he met you.
Thank you. As much as I like beating myself down because I feel I'm not doing things fast enough and good enough, I know that this is one of the things I'm so utterly, I don't know if I can say proud of, but excruciatingly happy to just having been able to open the door and kick him through and say, go, 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 don't even come back. And boy, did he. Due to all of your support, due to all of the love, and yes, I do have the image of a Michael Sisko in color, and I love it. And yes, it is Matt, Pete. This is from '99, so no worries about having met or not met someone. I'm sure you wouldn't even have recognized the old man. And who mentioned Night Music of Oakdene?
Matt.
Matt. Okay. This story gets creepier. There is part of it where the where chants are being played to call something. If you remember that vaguely, there is a reading of that thing.
Really?
Uh-huh. By someone who's in the chat.
Michael.
Uh-huh. And I don't know how he does that. And it's how I got introduced to Sisko, just for a record. I was told that he was handed a sheet of paper with the incantations, and he looked at it and started reading it like he spoke the damn language. Go to YouTube, look for, I think it's with Rainfall or with Steve Lyons. Just look for Michael Sisko and Night Music of Oakdene and blast your brains out.
Well, from the CD Strange Eons, on which Joe read a cut himself, a track on it.
That's one of my prized possessions.
Yeah.
I believe Bob Price read something there too, and I think it was something that Joe wrote, and it was we all recorded that in Joe's office in his old place up in upstate New York, an office that rivaled Bob's in the sheer density of action figures. It was probably a one-on-one relationship between action figures and books. But we all, it's like Joe just set up a mic and said, we're reading this, and here's your part, and here's your part. And, that was Joe. And he did it before you knew what you were doing.
Always the editor.
I suspected, but did not know, Sisko, what you just said about, well, let's put it like it is. Kat saving him from a situation, and we all need someone, creative types, we all need someone behind us, I mean, not even necessarily creative types, but, I think of whether you like Dean Koontz's Ready or not, he tells this story about his wife says, I will work for 5 years and I will pay all the bills, will do everything. And you write every day you write like it's a job. You write 8 to 10 hours a day. And if you haven't made it after 5 years, you're not going to make it. You know, and you just can't dismiss those people behind that that make it possible for that creative person to succeed. And don't misunderstand me. It's sometimes it's the male in the relationship doing it for the female. You know, it's just it's not gender based.
It's
and
passion. It's the passion.
yeah, it's passion for what they're doing. Yeah.
If you have a partner, and it doesn't matter if it's writing, if it's music, if it's I don't know, rescuing animals, for crying out loud.
Mhm.
If someone has a passion, and you can tell how important it is for them, try and give them the space. You don't have to be an idiot like me, working 40 hours a day so your husband can sit in his chair and bleed all the way the pages. But just try it. It's as long as someone can somehow provide. I mean, we had tight months, Jesus. But try. Don't look at the money. Try and see if you can get somewhere. We had
You know,
a 10-year deadline because we were lucky enough to be able to say that at some point he would get Social Security, and we would somehow manage to knuckle through a decade of, pasta for 2 weeks when money was tight. He of course clocked out on me months before his retirement, but that's how things go, and that's the other lesson we're all too familiar with. You never know when it's going to be over.
yeah.
There can be an accident. Whatever can happen. Yes, we had an age difference. Yes, I didn't expect to grow 80 with him by my side. I didn't expect him to leave this early. And you have plans, but you never know what happens. So the one thing I can say, I have no regrets about doing this. And the hard times, the good, the bad, the horrors, the growly beast on an airplane. Holy crap. Oh, trying to keep him from killing people because my luggage had gotten lost. It did return a day later. But like I said, just go for it. When you can, go for it. Don't sit there when you're 80 and you're slowly dying and you're thinking of all the things you could have done and should have done. Try it. If you fail, you fail. It happened.
If you remember, guys, a month or two back, we interviewed Salem Baxter, who appeared on Doctor Who recently. I really like her. She's Scottish, really great lady. And one of the things she said really stuck with me. She said, if you want to live your dreams, you're a creative person, you really want to live your dreams or whatever those dreams are, it's not that you'll necessarily always be poor, but you have to be willing to be poor. And that's really stuck with me. The willingness to put the dream above the money. Because, and I often say this, I don't want deathbed me looking back on me right now going, you're a fucking idiot. You should have taken the chance. You should have taken the risk. So, and you helped Joe take that risk is my point, Kat. A couple of comments from the sidelines. Carol says, thank you for sharing your words and your thoughts, everyone. Kim Smeltzer says, damn it, I made it this far without crying.
Welcome to my life, Kim. Hello.
And speaking of wonderful, wonderful support people, Danielle Davis, who's at school watching this while she gets ready for her work week, says, Kat is wonderful in caps. So yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Right back at you.
Well, I think that's all I've got, unless anyone wants to say anything else in closing.
I was just going to add briefly, kind of following from what we were just talking about. Because when Joe was in Portland, Mike, I think it was when you were here, and I think you were taking a nap and didn't feel well, and we went on a drive, and we kind of just
had a migraine, yeah.
Yeah, we just spent 2 or 3 hours driving around and me showing him things around Portland, and we just talked. We we weren't going anywhere. We just killed time basically. And for quite a while, what we talked about was that he was what his life had been like, because this is something that I hadn't known until this conversation, what his life had been like before Germany. You know, I knew some things, like I knew about, oh, I used to go hang out at Bob Price's house, or this is how I started publishing this book, but I didn't know about his personal life before that. And
soul-crushing Walmart experiences.
Yeah, and he talked about, you know, he said from certain people's point of view, the life that I had before I came to Germany might have seemed like a decent life, you know, got a decent car, a decent house, you got a family, you know, the outward appearance of sort of some comfort level and some success and whatever. But he said, you know, it was not giving me any pleasure. It was not giving me any sense of living my life for a reason. And he said, when I had the opportunity to change it, it just seems like such a necessary thing to do. And he said, now some people might look at how I'm living now and compare it to how I was living before and say, why did you change that? You were comfortable and it was easy and you had, you know, like I said, a big house and whatever. And now you're trying to scrape by and trying to get paid a few bucks for selling a story. But he said, for what really matters, he was getting what life was all about there after the change that he made, and that Cat was a big part of making his life worth something and making his life, before it was too late, getting something out of it and getting to try to be the Joe Pulver that we all kind of know and love, and, you know, really living in the words and the songs and the poetry, really being in it all the time, kind of swimming in it. That he felt like there was no question in his mind that he had made the right decision, and it didn't matter if there were times when money was tight or when he wanted to go do something and they couldn't afford to do it. It was didn't matter, you know, that he felt like for sure it had worked out the way he wanted it to.
Mike, I'm so glad that you shared that, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. And yeah, Joe felt that way. From external appearances, people might say, wow, you really took a dive downhill, but not in his mind.
No.
He wanted to do what was important. And I think that anyone listening out there, it doesn't matter what you do. If your passion is to rescue puppies, if your passion is to write, sculpt, teach, whatever it is, you know, go for that. Don't sell out. It's easy to sell out, you know?
Yeah, he definitely did not regret making the change. Not that I ever heard, and said that he felt very much the opposite way.
All right, couple of last ones. Christina Mole says, oh, well, my wife says, in honor of Joe, she knew this was going to be hard on me, as I'm sure it was hard on all of you. In honor of Joe, I'm going to cook steaks for the boys. Good night to everyone. Got to get to the store. Love to all. Christina Mole says, fuck, I really felt that. Thank you, guys. I think she's talking about what you said, Mike. Or maybe the whole thing, I don't know. And Kevin Wilson, long time listener of the show and supporter, says a wonderful tribute from all of you. And last but not least, Kelly Young really wanted to be here. He was coming in from out of town, and he sent me a message a little bit ago and says, dang it, I'm stuck in Sunday traffic. Please give my love to everyone there. So we all know how Kelly felt about Joe too. So I really appreciate all of you coming on today and talking about our friend. So thank you.
Final words on my end.
Yes.
Kelly has been stuck in traffic for a reason.
Yeah, he doesn't know how to drive.
Yeah, other than that, we all know that this would have brought up memories of someone else, and it's enough that you made one person cry in public. We don't need Kelly to, go off the deep end tonight. I know he's here in spirit, and that's all that counts.
Kelly's a very private person, but as he said, 2020 took so much from all of us, and right. we'll leave it at that. Took so much from all of us.
There'll be a time when we all cross paths again, and you'll all pay for this. Maybe not Kelly. Maybe he will. We'll see. But thank you for giving us all this venue, Mike.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks to everybody for being here. If it was just me and me reminiscing, it would not be very powerful, but all of us together talking about Joe. And I do want to say I invited other people for various reasons that were close to Joe, and for various reasons they couldn't make it. And so, you guys are in our thoughts too. So anyway, thanks everyone. And we've got Bo Johnson as the guest next week. Thank you so much to all my Patreons for keeping the lights on, because literally that's what you do. And if you're not a patron, you get a lot of extra stuff, a lot of extra podcasts. Just Google Lovecraft eZine Patreon. And again, thanks to you guys for being here, and we will see everybody next week.